Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my co-hosts and friends, Brantley Smith and Awen Dunning. Brantley, Awen, good to be back. Good to have you back on, Awen. It's been a while. As you know, all of this stuff with Bethel is just flying everywhere. People are sending me so many things. I honestly can't even read them all right now or watch them. Most of them are videos. But so much is coming out. And Awen, you mentioned that you wanted to share some of your experiences. As everybody knows, I'm not one of these people that hops onto the bandwagon whenever some big event happens and some church is being attacked from all sides for doing something very destructive. I'm more of a methodical attack the core doctrine, attack the thing that really caused the whole crumbling empire to exist. However, there is some precedence for having somebody who was actually a victim at Bethel to come on and speak. So glad that you offered to do this, and I guess I'll just let everybody listen as you introduce yourself again for those who don't know who you are and how you are connected to Bethel.
So probably most people that would know me from somebody who was speaking out in regards to standing beside the original Jane Doe that came forward with IHOP. Spent some time early on with, Mike in that camp at Metro before it became IHOP, was a part of IHOP for a little while. But, you read these cult books and they talk about that sometimes you end up in 3 or 4 different camps. And I'll just say this. For me personally, when I left and detangled a lot of things with IHOP, the Gnosticism, the works, the intense fasting, the everything's evil and cloistered, and, I could go on and on. For me, I really felt like Bethel was like this cup of cold water in the desert after that, not realizing that it was on the opposite side of the spectrum, but it was on the same spectrum. I've said this before, like sometimes I feel like that Branhamism is a virus that it just mutates a little bit differently in the camp. So there's similarities and there's differences. A lot of people find themselves hopping from Morning Star to IHOP to Bethel. But I personally went to 2 conferences. I'm so ashamed to say this, but I went to 2 School of the Prophets and 2 other conferences, listened to their music a ton, listened to their teachings, followed them on social media and that kind of thing. So that's kind of, and I have permission to say this, but my son did 3 years at BSSM.
Oh, ooh, that's crazy. I am super grateful for Awen. I wanted to interject this before we got deep in the conversation, but me and Awen became friends about 2 years ago. I think it's been now. I was trying to recount last night, and Awen is responsible for me meeting John, which I am super grateful for introducing us and opening up a wide network of connections to me. So I am super grateful for you, super grateful for your journey, and I am excited to talk to you about Bethel.
I think for me, I think we'll have another conversation another day where I'd love to share about some of the experiences that I've had at School of the Prophets and things like that. When I was listening to your podcast, John, and you were talking about somebody within the old camp around Branham starting School of the Prophets, about fell out of my chair. How interesting of a title. And so, like I said, I'm so embarrassed. But, I was trained really early on within Metro and those types of things and called out as a prophet, prophetess, whatever. I fully denounce all titles and offices and all that kind of nonsense. And, I don't have a stage. I'm just a nobody. But I will say that, I spent a lot of time training and activating and all of the different things. And I spent actually time with Shawn Bolz when he was at Metro. And he was just this kind of nerdy guy that played video games and had a prophetic gift, and he wasn't getting addresses and names and birth dates and all that stuff. But there was a certain level of discipleship or mentoring with him. And so I find that pretty interesting. When I saw him launch from Bethel stage and doing all this stuff, I was like, what have I missed? Because I was off the grid detangling for a really long time. And I'm like, something happened between here and here with Shawn. And so never saw him at any conferences or anything like that, but I saw him on all the rosters and, saw the videos. And then, of course, you see him on the stage at the Call and Azuzas and all that different stuff. And I just thought, wow, dang, something happened in his camp.
You mentioned it's like a virus, and it's really odd. In fact, I have a person today that just emailed me. I get this all the time. This is guilt by association. That's the most common phrase that's thrown around. But when you understand that it's a doctrinal framework that they're all sharing, how can you not say that it's all connected? They're all doing the same thing. It's the same stage acts. And the problem is places like Bethel, and this is my opinion, so take it as for what you will. They probably have a different opinion, but I look at it like it's a spiritual den of thieves. I hate to say it like that, but you have these ministries that are built upon people who are known to be con artists, and they're supporting it. John G. Lake, one of the guys that is reverenced, not just Bethel, but many of the NAR, and just go to the web and type in John G. Lake con man, and you'll see they have completely uncovered all of his history, how he was the person who was helping Dowie with his con, with his faith healing con. They would be in different cities, and he would take a telegraph and say, I'm healed. Well, John G. Lake goes to Africa and he does the same thing, but he has family members who were healed of the same disease like 15 times. It's kind of crazy because they're all part of the stage act. And that's what this becomes. It's a stage act, and it's a virus. And you mentioned the School of the Prophets. I actually have a person who's coming on soon to talk about that school that's here locally. But it's a cascading event of error that instead of cascading to its destruction, it cascades bigger and bigger, and big empires are built upon top of it.
When my son went to Bethel, and again, I have permission to share some things from my perspective, that's when the eyes started opening a little bit. But I'd almost like to talk about the indoctrination and programming that happens when we're really young. First of all, I came into Metro at 19 years old, an 11-month discipleship program, left for 2 years back to a vineyard, and then came in 9 months into an uber charismatic, Lou Engle orientated, hyperworks, hyper demand group. And you hear a lot of these things, and I'm sure Brantley could speak to these as well, because he came into IHOP kind of after I was gone, right? So chew the meat, spit out the bones is a big one. God will offend your mind to reveal your heart, so, and all of these teachings about offense, they use, the bait of Satan and these types of things. So there's these teachings that go on that turn off your critical thinking. Every time you're quote unquote offended, or AKA, using critical thinking or sensing things that are wrong, it's like programming kicks in, right? Like it's like muscle memory. It's just there. Sometimes you actively tell yourself that, and sometimes you just do it. So my son calls me one day, as we talked a couple times a week, and he's like, "No, I've got a question for you." He's like, "I've heard Bill Johnson say this a couple different times, and I've heard other people say this too, and it's not sitting right with me." I'm like, "Okay, bud, what is it?" And he's like, "They say that they're not raising up disciples, that they're raising up revivalists." So, I'm trying to teach my soon-to-be adult son critical thinking. I'm like, "Well, what do you think? Like, why doesn't that sit right with you?" And he's just like, over and over again, people's complaint here is that they're not being discipled, and, they're creating revivalists. So we have this whole conversation, and my conversation with him was, what was the last words that Jesus said? Go therefore and make disciples. So in my mind, immediately, and I think I even said these words to my son, chew the meat and spit out the bones. Here's the thing. At what point do we realize there's a boneyard? Boneyard after boneyard after boneyard, and where it's enough, where it's big enough that it's a problem. That was my first kind of like,
I love whenever those phrases become things that we end up using and it becomes a positive thing for us. I find myself all the time. Mike used to always pray that prayer of like, God, let me see what you see and feel what you feel when you look at me, kind of thing. And I've caught myself over the years, like using that as like a centering practice of sorts. As you were talking about prior to going into these environments, almost being groomed for it in a sense, I think about, and I don't think we've ever talked about this, John, that there was shades of like the shepherding movement in my home church with our youth group specifically, to where it was what it ended up doing was removed agency from us. It removed the risk of consequence in a sense. So it was appealing in that way, because we knew if we had our leaders' approval for something, that if something went bad, it came back on them. But we all know if it did go bad, it would always come back on us. But that was, kind of where it went.
I don't think it's come out yet before this podcast drops, but I've been doing work, as you know, with other people in YWAM, looking to try to understand how is that all connected. And as I'm researching, I came across a news article where leadership from the shepherding movement were actually visiting the bases. So the shepherding, it's widespread. This is all really connected if you really understand how it all works. It's connected so much that I sympathize with you working with your son. I have friends who are in splinter groups of Branhamism who, whenever they finally escape that splinter group, the very first place that they go is Bethel, because it's so familiar to them. Even though Branham, he's totally different doctrine, different central figure, etc., the doctrinal framework that was established, that Branham was helping to establish, it is so familiar to these people that they get re-victimized whenever they leave the groups.
Sometimes I wonder how vulnerable to be, but why not? If your story can help somebody else out there, like I was an idiot, a sincere, useful idiot, I guess. But I actually went to Bethel the first time because it's a whole series of events that's not worth getting into, but I felt like God sent me there to get a mantle. And dang. So, it's when you bring your kids into things, man, it's, I'm so thankful, I've paid for a lot of counseling. I'll just say that. But we've had frank conversations where we've had to apologize. And I'm very grateful for my adult children that we, have a great relationship and we're detangling together, and that, they've been able to share hurt. And we love each other a ton. And so, that doesn't always happen. And I'm really grateful. But one of the other kind of core indoctrination things is this one. And Brantley, maybe you can relate to this, but it's like, dig for the gold. So you're going to pick up on stuff. And so it's almost taught that this radius around everybody, there's this soulish floating stuff, you can picture screen like Iron Man with Jarvis or something, swiping it out of the way. And there's just, all of these soulish things around someone, you're going to pick up on their sin. And so any prophet worth their 2 cents is going to kind of bat it out of the way and reach through and find the gold, And so, yes, on one hand, we should be seeing people at their best and what they can be and those types of things. But what I think that really does is every time your brain says, this is a red flag, this is a yellow flag, all of a sudden your critical thinking goes down because you're afraid of being offended, or, you got to, find the gold. And I think a lot of predators take advantage of this stuff. Shawn Bolz taught it. Bob Jones taught it. Bob Hartley taught. I mean, I don't know how many people didn't, but it's a really big one at Bethel. So there's a lot of this positive thinking, they call it, declarations, but let's call it what it is. It's name it, claim it. It's just a rebranded word of faith message mixed in there. And it doesn't allow for people to pay attention to stop signs that they should see.
Yeah, it's the see the best in people, like the digging for the gold thing. It made me think, I'm super grateful for Mike Winger's work, but if you don't know, it's a 6-hour video that he did. So I don't know too many people that actually watched the whole thing all the way through. I probably watched 2.5, 3 hours of it or something. But one of the things one of the weapons that Shawn used in that with the people that he was grooming, in a sense, we'll say, was that he would turn it back on to them. That instead of it being something that he was doing wrong, even though it was obvious by his actions what he was doing would not be accepted, I don't think in any religious circle, let alone Christian circles, like it was just not okay. And he looked at them and says, well, you must have a religious spirit, or you're just uptight, or you're just this or just that. And it's Darvo in a sense in the moment that it's reversing victim and offender kind of thing. Oh, it's your fault that you're uncomfortable with this. And And I can't imagine that extra element of, because I don't know if they were fully aware of his data mining and stuff the whole time, like the people that worked with him. But whenever you're around those prophetic people, and I'm sure you're very familiar with this, is you're afraid that they're just going to like see your soul and like see like all your dirt and all your sin. And they know what you did before you came to church today. And they know like these things. It's like, God forbid they call it out from the platform or something, but then you find out they're all grifters. And again, fear becomes a tool of control.
I've mentioned on the podcast before, but there was a minister in one of the churches that I attended, and it's exactly like you said. You fear what they say because he can peer into your very soul. That's how this framework is established. But I remember clearly sitting there, and this absolutely drop-dead gorgeous woman walks into the congregation, and I'm a man, everybody else who's a man, you see the beauty that's walking in, right? Well, as the guy's preaching, he can't keep his eyes off of her. And afterwards, he apparently called her out and said, "You have a seductive spirit on you, lady." And he was dealing with his own personal issues, obviously, as were probably half the men in the congregation. But he redirected that focus to her because now she can start guilting herself. Is it something I did? What did I do wrong? And that's really the problem here. The leadership won't admit that they're human. They want to be superhuman. They're above all of this, and they can peer into your very soul. So whenever half of the things that you just said, Brantley, the phrases, the loaded language that you were using, that was also common loaded language in what we came out of in Branhamism, and that's why it's so familiar. That's why the re-victimization.
Man, if we had $1 for every time we've heard that story, Jezebel, or it's so interesting how scripture's taken in this charismatic fundamentalist light until it's stuff like pluck out your your eyeballs because you're, like it's not what's happening outside that defiles you. It's what's happening inside. Oh no, like those scriptures don't apply right now. It's, so-and-so needs to go through some healing program or something like that. Cause they didn't wear, a burqa or something. It's absolutely ridiculous. I kind of want to turn the thought to some of the online stuff because this reminds me of Chris talking about, Chris Valentin, how tough it is to be a pastor in an online age and, those types of things. And so, yes, but also, can I just say, you took up the job of being a leader. And there really is a difference between online trolls because there really are people who will just argue for the sake of argument and they're just, mean and people asking legitimate questions. For instance, I know several people during the Bethel debacle coming out, Mike's been on their stage, they're buddies, all of that kind of thing. Side note really quickly that I want to say is I have heard from a lot of people at Bethel, including my son, that when people come from IHOP and go to their school, they actually, and this is my wording, but they put them through deprogramming from IHOP because they don't like the, end times, doom and gloom, they're really happy about like the future, the future is going to be better. Anyways, that was one of the things that drew me there. But back to Chris and online. So what I find really interesting is, in my opinion, I think that some of his behavior online is kind of bullying-ish. Now, granted, it's his page. I guess he can act like how he wants, but, fruit of the spirit or whatever might be nice. But he just blocks anyone that asks a question. So we had folks that were a part of, like, hey, BSSM alumni here, are you going to speak up about Mike? And so he goes on stage and I've heard him several times when I was at School of the Prophets, like, everybody blasts us all the time and takes stuff out of context and, like casting this whole thing of like, woe is me, I'm the victim. And he literally cracks a joke, calls the people asking him to speak out an idiot, and the whole crowd laughs. And I'm thinking, yeah, 20 victims of a multi-decade abuse. That's funny stuff, man. Like, why are we making fun of this stuff? Like, weeping is the answer here. Like not Mike Bickle's my friend. And so we see an ecosystem there of many predators, of many grifters, of the place where predators go to be restored. And so this isn't an alone event that just happened. Mike Winger should not be making 6-hour videos, which, by the way, I watched the 3-hour one and the 6-hour one. And we just shouldn't he shouldn't be doing that. They should be calling their own stuff out.
Which they seem incapable of doing. We had a front row seat, me and Awen, to whenever this stuff was going on with Bob Hartley after he got called out at IHOP, and he fled to Bethel. And even Bob's son Jed, who's also I would call him a friend, and John has him on, and we know Jed, and Jed reached out to Bethel leadership, reached out to security there, did these different things, and they still turned a blind eye. And as you're talking about Chris calling them idiots, like I can't help, and I know people hate that I go here so often, but I heard that in a news clip just last night of someone who is questioning a narrative of media, and one of our national leaders will say, looks at them and says, anybody that didn't see that, you're all idiots. You're all idiots if you think that. And it's such a learned behavior. And it's also like a tool to cause that dividing line of like, you don't want to be the idiot, so you pick a side is what ends up happening. But whenever they frame those questions and those inquiries as persecution, you can't help but laugh.
People ask me why I don't jump on the bandwagon whenever something like this comes out. I usually avoid it. It's not just because I'm more interested in the history, which that part is true. I could really care less about the modern, but the bigger problem is you jump on that bandwagon and you're actually playing into their narrative. The way this narrative works is this is spiritual warfare. We are spiritual warriors. The enemy is risen up against the church, and now we have to admit our apology, and that always happens. The apology comes, but what comes next is textbook, and it will happen with Bethel. It's happened with IHOP. It happens all the way down the line. They realize that actually the apology and the fallout from that is less powerful than the martyr complex that they come with next. They will play the martyr card. They will say Satan rose up against us. They attacked our church. They almost brought us down. Look what happened. And what it is, they redirect focus from the real issue, which here we have con artists that they're supporting who are predators. That's really the bottom line. They redirect focus from that to the fact that we're spiritual warriors and look what just happened to our church. Well, in that framework, they are guiltless. It's the enemy that did it. It's not us. It kind of reminds me of my kid when he does something bad. He said, the devil made me do it, Dad. That's what they're saying. Exactly what they're saying.
It's interesting how you look at, I don't know, hypothetically, like let's say you're a predator. And you know that there's a chance that you've got lots of victims and that maybe the history prophetically that you've been weaving could come undone because, I don't know, maybe it's made up or altered or all of the above, or things didn't happen that were prophesied, or you've got victims, right? So the smartest defense is an offense, right? So you come up with stories in advance about like, lo and behold, someday a black horse is going to come, or whatever that situation, hypothetically might happen. But it's like this in a lot of the different places. But can I just say that at Bethel, there's this, don't look back. Like Bill had this, maybe someone else is running his page. Maybe it was locked and loaded in advance. I don't know. But like right after these videos come out, it's like yesterday's sins, don't visit the past, And so there's this kind of like mind blocking or the sin leveling, even of like, don't ever look back, ever, because, that's the blood of Jesus cancels this out. Here's a quick story. So I live in a place where a lot of people from Bethel live. And by the way, I have a ton of friends that are involved in Bethel. And there's good things at Bethel. And there's really beautiful people. Please still be my friends after this podcast. But I think they're wonderful. And I think that they're sincere. And I think that some of them, like me, have been groomed. And so this story represents that. So without going into too much detail, I ended up meeting this person who had moved from Bethel, and we kind of got stuck together in this situation. And so it's going to be a meal together with other people, and this person doesn't know me from Adam, right? Doesn't know my job with IHOP or anything, in terms of speaking out. And out of the blue, she says, good golly, like, isn't it wild, that whole story with Robert Morris and that woman coming forward years and years later, and, she's just a money grubbing, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm just like, don't, just cuss, don't hit, I'm just like, wow, like, this is really interesting. I don't know what it is, but when women have that response, there's just something that guts me, having been a victim in my childhood of a ton of those different types of things, man. And the weight and the counseling that you need and the physical breakdown of your body that happens. And no, I'm not a victim. I am a survivor. I've got plenty of wonderful stories I can tell, but I'm like, are you aware that happened for 4 years? Are you aware that she signed NDAs? Are you aware that she was silenced? Are you aware? Well, I haven't really looked into it. Well, let me just say, first of all, that survivor deserves millions of dollars because there is a biblical concept called recompense. But the harm that was cost her a lot of money just to duct tape herself together. But here's what this woman kept continually bringing up. Haven't you sinned, Awen? And I'm like, yeah, but no, I have never, assaulted a 12-year-old for 4 years. Listen, all sin isn't the same. There are sins that go before a man. There are sins that go behind a man. When leaders sin, they should be called out from the front. I'll be kind of reading some scriptures later because I think it might be really helpful for a lot of the folks who've been brainwashed with this other stuff. But it makes me so mad when the name of Jesus or the blood of Jesus or any religious terms whatsoever are used as an excuse that there isn't responsibility for what happened. It's just infuriating. My jaw was just dropped. I could not believe that my quote unquote lack of mercy or understanding of the cross was the problem there. It was wild.
Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the New Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. Earlier in the podcast, you were talking about the indoctrination, and you weren't afraid to say it. And talking about the lady who gives this type of response, it isn't just the women that do this. The men do it, but you're correct in that by and large, the women are more likely to do it than men. And there's a reason for that. The indoctrination of this hierarchy that they have created for the male and females, they have created it in such a way that the women feel like the leadership can do no wrong. And that is by design, and that's part of the reason why we have so many predators. When a leader does something that's horrific, they say, well, you sin too. What's the big deal? He's sinning, you're sinning, we're all sinning. Hey, we're all sinners. That's the kind of the framework that's been established here. But they don't understand, like you said, that leadership is in a different category. You can't continue leadership if you're doing this kind of thing. But because of the way that this has been established, the leadership are above any sort of accountability, and this authoritarian control that they have created, it puts them in a position where they can't be seen as mortals. They have to be supermortal. They're basically the mediator between God and man. And who are you to call out the mediator between God and man? And it's just not a biblical model at all.
No, the things that I keep going back to, you're talking earlier about, it's almost like there's a playbook for this stuff. And there really is. I'm thinking back to IHOP stuff that's very similar to what you're referencing, Awen, is I remember Mike would use the phrase all the time. He would talk about the rage of Satan. And so that was a way to frame these outside questions, these quote unquote persecutions as the devil. And I remember there being times where it's like, oh, it's not that person. It's the devil kind of thing. It just reframed slightly. And after all the Mike Bickle stuff went public in October of 23, one of the first messages we heard was from the prophet, air quotes, Chris Reed, who came and he preached the message of don't look back. That was exactly the message it was of God has so much in front of you. Don't dwell on the past. Don't look back. And if you do look back, he framed it in the context of the story of Lot and his wife. He's like, if you look back, you don't want to be turned into a pillar of salt. And so like at that point, it's put on you. And the other tool that Mike would use, I think that he hoped, I think, would come around and save him was the whole push, delete, and move on. That there was like such a low, there wasn't a whole lot of consequence for sin in those, to be so outspoken against sin. Sometimes there would be penalizations that happen, but they would use that, especially with their inner circles. We hear stories that they would use that to grant themselves clemency in a sense, that it's push, delete, and move on. We all have weaknesses. We all have this. And all the while they're using that as a tool to push their abuses under the rug, which is very different than most sins that we are committing on a weekly basis. We're not abusing people just as part of the human experience, but it's the sin leveling. That is exactly what it is.
I'm not one to be like, okay, their response wasn't repentancy enough or humble enough or whatever it is. Like, I truly can't judge the motives of somebody's heart. Okay. But let's see the fruit of repentance. How's that? Release everybody that has signed NDAs through the year. That is a fruit of repentance. NDAs do not belong in the church. Name and call out the other predators that you have connected to, endorsed, put on your stage, etc. Be honest about what has happened and what you've known. What I found interesting is they didn't even discuss the Bob Hartley stuff at all in that. Like
did they not? I didn't catch that.
No. And so maybe I've missed something, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but to my knowledge, they have not reached out to Jubilee Dawn to apologize to her, or the other guy that cashed in his retirement to create a film and almost lost his marriage and all that kind of stuff as well. Listen, those are two stories. There are thousands of stories of people who have made decisions, moved places, married people, broke up with people, you name it, that the fallout, the fruit from this stuff is so rotten. And it's so interesting. We don't study spiritists, right? Like we study scripture. And, in listening to John's podcast, he's talking about, Roy E. Davis and, the mentalists and of course, getting information fed to them and all of those types of things. And then I've seen videos since then of Paul Cain having people moved through the line, and he's got the numbered cards and they've got very good memories, if nothing else. But it's like, when you see it, you're just like, oh my gosh, like you see the grift. It's like the wool falls off your eyes. But listen, people don't know about Shawn Bolz, except for the most part that he was launched from their stage. They talk them up. They share stories. They lift them up to celebrity status. And now it's time to make a recompense for the harm that's been done.
Yeah, I completely agree. I read their statement. I didn't listen to the apology, the video apology, but frankly, for that reason, I knew that they weren't doing anything to bring restitution. And at that point, words are just words. But I can't help but to look back at where Shawn came from, as you mentioned earlier. Like, he was a product of Mike Bickle's culture. I have heard those who say that his kind of mentor of sorts, somebody that we're all very familiar with if you listen to the podcast, is Paul Cain. And so it seems like a bad joke eventually. Like, whenever you see that all these people are connected to the same root system over and over, like it feels like a bad dream that you want to wake up from is really what it feels like.
If I were a predator and I wanted to go make money and be in a place that if I was found out that I would be quickly restored, I'd go to the charismatic church. Now, I can't speak to other churches. I know there's plenty of stuff that goes on in them, but I just haven't been involved with them. So people are so quick to eat any breadcrumb to see people restored. And listen, I think that truly repentant people can be restored to God, but there's a point where the sheep or the people, they just need to be protected. And, I'll never forget Rick Joyner reading what he said. Like, he knew Todd Bentley was going to like fall again and like re-victimize people essentially. And he'd put him into place anyways. And I'm like, why is no one like, Rick, you need to sit down and retire, buddy. Like, that's not okay. And it's a safe haven. It's an ecosystem that needs to be addressed. And there's so many teachings, and I'd love to talk about some of those in a minute here.
Well, that's just it. It is an ecosystem. And, I get accused often of all trails lead back to Branham in my research. That's not really quite accurate, but many trails do, because he and Gordon Lindsay systematized this entire thing. There were all of these other ministries that were doing similar things, bits and pieces of it, and these two men basically created a platform that generated cult leaders. You can read through Voice of Healing and you can find all of the different guys that are claiming, I saw an angel, I saw a vision from heaven, I actually went to heaven, I actually went to hell, all of these different things. And it's just stage act if you read and understand. I mean, one of the stage acts literally was a boy who claimed that he could see through a plastic eye from God. That's the kind of stage acts that's being promoted in this thing, right? When you have that kind of ecosystem where it really doesn't matter if you're Christian or not, as long as you have a gimmick and as long as you can draw a crowd into that gimmick. The idea of the movement was really this, which is a Gnostic idea, that we can tell lies for the sake of a holy end, because if we lie and the faith is converted by the people, and that faith is in Jesus Christ, then we have done God's work, whether we're lying or not. The problem is, you still have liars at the top, and those liars they have no sense of accountability, or, I hate to say it, but many of them probably aren't even Christian, because Christians don't do this kind of thing, but they're in the leadership of this ecosystem.
I think that there's a website that people should check out. It's called showmethetoes.com. And it's still up. One of the things that Mike Winger brings up in that video is the fact that there was this woman who claimed that 3 of her toes grew back, and then they wouldn't show the toes, right? Show me the toes. and finally she, they're like, we're not going to re-victimize her. What? Like, by having her show the miracle, like, we're not going to document it. And so she finally puts a picture of her foot up there, and then somebody scrolls down in her Facebook post and sees an old picture of her foot that's exactly the same. Well, that was addressed in Mike Winger's video in terms of this buddy of Bill's saying it happened, and Bill going on stage and saying it happened. It was verified by a doctor that her toes grew. I mean, the toes grew or they didn't, right? So, I'm not going to call out every miracle. I believe in, I've seen some things that I can't, deny. But, let's just not make it up, right? So there's this book. So Danny Silk was one of the people who was brought in behind the scenes in terms of Shawn. It's called Unpunishable. Yes, I've read it. Yes, I've even recommended it to some people. It's really interesting to me to look back at like what was happening in my brain when I read that, because there were some really beautiful things in this book. But the premise is that he tells this story. So I'm not going to name a name. He happens to be over all the Prophetic still to this day, as of January 12th at least, when he did a teaching, and at Bethel. So here's the story. He had an intern or BSSM student, someone, younger and in their care, living in his home, and he, quote unquote, had a affair. And he got found out, and they put him basically on desk duty. And they told, it was the second year or the third year, or the second and the third year only. And then it comes out that he'd had a quote unquote another affair. I don't know the details of it, but let's just call it what it is. It was CSA. Just like a doctor and a patient, a therapist and their client, a teacher and their student, they lose licensure and go to jail, right? So this is a crime, by the way, in 14 or 15 states. Not enough, but we're going to do something about that. That being said, he wasn't restored properly in the past, apparently. And so this woman is like fired from her job there and treated terribly. And he goes through this restoration process, never told the church. Now, this book is all about that there's people that Danny knows that would sit there in judgment and not understand the mercy and the grace of Jesus, and they would want him like permanently removed from ministry. And I remember reading that and I was like, man, I don't understand mercy. I don't understand grace. I don't understand the cross. And there's something wrong with me. Well, rewind. to my first School of the Prophets, which was right when the car fire was, so it was 2018. I go there and I go to, oh, this is so embarrassing, but I go to this dream interpretation workshop. And this dude is sharing about dream interpretation. And one of the things that he talks about is that there are times where you can have a dream and you might, I'm trying to find the word so I don't get buzzed here, have intimacy, like a husband and a wife would have, with someone you're not married to, or person, or even Jesus. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's something wrong, that it could represent intimacy with Jesus. And I'm like, like, what in the, like, I didn't even hear this nonsense at Metro. and he's talking, and this beautiful black mama from Africa stands up in her beautiful garb, and she just only a black mama can, she just dresses him down, and she's like, where we're from, like, we're not in rational land, like, we understand stuff in the spirit, and like, this is not okay, and da-da-da. The dude doubles down. And I just remember thinking, like, check, red flag, like, but here he is endorsed by these guys and on the stage, and they haven't called him out on his story yet. So 2 years later, I go back to School of the Prophets, and they reveal this story to everybody. And I'm like, God's mercy, God's mercy, God's mercy, God's mercy. Something's wrong with me that I have a problem with this. I'm a little more educated now. That was CSA, and it is unacceptable. And that is just one story about the ecosystem of what's being taught to all of these people. You should have at least told your church so they could choose to attend or not. I mean, like, bare minimum, right?
I'm one of these people that's not too proud to admit that much of my moral code came from the Andy Griffith Show. I watched that show, and the funny part is it actually had more morals than the religion that I left, which is just, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. But there was this one episode, I don't know if you saw it or not, but there was a ex-con man who came into Mayberry, and he was just trying to establish himself, find some work. The whole town rose up against him. Everybody hated this guy, and he was trying to do better. And Andy Griffith stepped in. It's the, at the end, there's the heartwarming thing where he explains that this guy is trying to do good. He had a bad past, and now he's trying to do good. And the key difference between that, the moral of that story, and the moral of the church today, the charismatic church today, Andy Griffith was not at all hiding the fact that this guy was an ex-convict. You might be at risk. This guy, yes, was an ex-convict. He's trying to turn his life around. In this type of religion that has been established, they hide the fact. They don't want you to know. Picture that same story if, say it wasn't Andy, say that it was Opie, and Opie starts letting the guy, run the Little League for the kids, and finally they find out that, oh my gosh, the Little League's been coached by this ex-convict. All of our kids were at risk. Andy would have stepped in and said, all right, all y'all need to be locked up. And that's really what needs to happen today. You look at the church today, they're letting people who should never, ever be back in leadership in those positions. And some of them say that they did some small thing. There's still no transparency. So when you find out, that's why all of this explodes into the way that it does today. That's why Bethel has to have this response they have. Because they're not transparent in the beginning, whenever it finally does leak out, you have to step up and say, oh, we're sorry, this happened. And then later, like I said, they're going to play the martyr card. Satan rose up against our church. It almost took us down. Look what happened. But now we're better. God is back on our side. That's literally how this house of cards crumbles and rebuilds itself.
I think, too, one of the things that stood out to me at Bethel was it's called honor, but it's like celebrity worship. When Bill's going to go speak, for instance, there's a standing ovation before he even speaks, like a really long one. And I'm like, okay, there's something wrong with me in dishonor. Do you see a theme in me like that I've been healing from? And then they have these flashcards that they sell in the bookstore. I don't know if they're still there, but they were last time I checked. They're quotes of Bill that you could buy. And I'm like, who are we following, y'all? Like, that's not honor. Like, that's people worship. So my first okay, my first like flag was my son, like, the discipleship thing. And then my second one was they did the series on the office of, the prophet, the pastor, whatever. And so Bill was the apostle. And so at the end, I think it was Dan Farley. He's like, Bill, like, what about this NAR thing? Like, are you part of the NAR? And Bill's like, I don't know really what that is. This is my paraphrase. And I remember sitting there and I was like, I know what that is. How do you not know what that is? And I just thought, I think he just fibbed, for lack of a better word. I'm like, did he just lie? Like, and then you're like, is that possible that no, that's not possible that he lied. The other thing was my oldest son, when he found out we were kind of going to Bethel, he's like, that they practice necromancy there. Like, what's up with that? And I'm like, no, that's not true. Because here's the thing, like there were like accusations of grave soaking, sucking, whatever. And they released a statement like a couple of rowdy, unbelievable, students went and did some things. Like, we're not behind that. Like, we disavow this, message we'll delete in 30 seconds. And come to find out, like, I actually have pictures of the late, Benny Johnson laying on different, God's generals' graves. We see Bill there. He says he was just honoring. We see, of course, video of like Sean Foy at Count Zinzendorf with that other guy, that little guy that defends IHOP all the time. And it's fascinating how there's just proof over and over and over again that it's happening. And so when I saw that, I was like, well, that's a lie because you're doing that. You did that. So if you're lying about that, what else are you lying about?
Well, I remember a very similar thing happening whenever I was in IHOP with Dave Sliker. We asked about NAR is what it was. And we were all hearing that phrase for the first time. And this probably would have been 2010, 2011, something like that. And I remember him being like, no, we're not that. And like trying to give all these reasons of why. But it also reminded me of, which we still don't have a whole lot of public information on, I guess, which is the Tyler Deaton stuff that happened at IHOP. Whenever his wife was found in a car by the lake, is what we'll say. There was a very specific distancing that happened between IHOP leadership and this group. But whenever we hear testimonies from this group, IHOP leadership was actually very close with this group and like had mentoring relationships with this group. And it wasn't until, because that was ideal for them. These people were living in extreme community. They were sharing finances, sharing housing, sharing food, all these different things. They were having meetings every night. Like, it makes IHOP look like a walk in the park as far as like high control. And as soon as things take a turn, it's disavow. We don't know these people. I've heard stories, not going to out people, but I've heard stories. As soon as all that stuff happened, they're running and wiping email servers, doing name searches. They're deleting videos, all these different things to try to hide the fact that they knew anything about these folks. And we're still seeing that happen with Winger, with his videos, as he was approaching Bethel with these things about Shawn. All of a sudden, all these videos start getting taken down. And I love that he like broke out his cell phone showing the computer screen showing that this video is unavailable now, because that's what they do. I've been doing a research project, and I told a friend, I was like, I can't say anything about this publicly, because if I do, they're going to end up taking everything down. Like that's their move. That's what they do. It's a playbook. It is.
Interestingly enough, the first survivor that went forward was to Patricia King, and it sounds like she treated that person with empathy, made some recordings, 3 different ones, sent them to Cheon. It was a game of hot potato, right? Listen, I haven't told my personal story yet of a groomer and everything that I went through, trying to come forward. Maybe I'll be brave enough someday. But they call it the second wound, how you're treated after you try to come forward. And honestly, to this day, it's more painful than the things that happened. And it just breaks my heart that these people have been hurt, and all the while there's books being sold. And frankly, every single person, I agree with Mike Winger, every single person that endorsed that book needs to come forward with a statement. So back to Patricia King, she's like, she issues this statement like, I feel really bad, I'm sorry. Maybe there was some genuine stuff in there, great. But she's like, I do not hardly know the man. And Mike Winger like whips out all these videos, and she's like, I've known Shawn Bolz since he was a teenager. And all these different times where she's just like, dear friends and friends of the house and all these different things. And it's like, you're lying, Listen, these honorariums that these guys make are unbelievably huge.
Yeah, it's crazy because like the financial impacts, like that's the thing. Like, what does somebody have to do? What do we not know about Shawn that he becomes such a liability that they cut him off? I mean, there's public testimony and all this stuff, but that didn't keep them from keeping Paul Cain on IHOP property for years. That didn't keep Bob Jones from staying in ministry. Like, we know these guys have skeletons in their closet. Like, I wonder if they have like a data analytics person in their back office. Like, at what point do they become more of a risk than they are a benefit?
Well, and Charles and I talked about that this Monday. It's probably come out before you guys have heard it. Jed and I are going to talk about it to some extent. Paul Cain had dirt on every single person and actually had recordings, and we got one of the transcripts of one of those recordings, and you can clearly tell that some buttons are being pushed. Even though the transcript that we got was heavily edited, it looked like, it's hard to know because we don't know what's underneath there, but it looks like to protect Chuck Smith. And Chuck Smith had a sudden change of heart. I'm not going to condemn Paul Cain of his homosexuality after Paul Cain came and bullied us and threatened whatever it was he threatened. So very clearly they have dirt on each other. But it just shows that this is a systematic problem. This is not a single church problem. This is something that is developing over and over in bigger and nastier ways. And it all comes back to the fact that the foundation that was laid wasn't a Christian foundation, and all of these ministries are building on top of something that wasn't Christian in the first place. So anyway, very glad that you came and shared all of this with Awen. I may ask you to come back and do some more with us if you have more information. Would you be interested in doing that?
I would. I feel like I talked about 10% of something. I'd love to add this before we go, if that's okay. Two things. One, a book I recommend, Something's Not Right by Wade Mullen. It's kind of showcases the playbook. So concessions and minimizations, I'll leave you with those words. Look up the definitions. Could be what's happening, could be not. The other thing is, please, please, please seek legal counsel and not an ambulance chaser before going to this thing that Bethel has set up where you can call in and quote unquote anonymously and give tips or, say I'm a survivor of something. Listen, I've lived through 4 internal investigations. Now, the people that go through those end up quadruply wounded. So I can't tell you not to do it because I could get in trouble. But what I would say is please talk to a trusted lawyer before you come forward, because I care about survivors coming forward and their stories and them not being re-injured, because those types of things could be places where stories go to die.
That's very good advice. And thanks again so much for doing this. And thank you, Brantley, for helping me. This has been interesting, fun, sad, and scary all at the same time. So if you've enjoyed our show and you want more information, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion, From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.